Hello, friends. Today we get to look at another book. This book is our book about the weather. This is the front cover, back cover, and the title. The title of this book is What's the Weather? And this is the spine. Just like our big book about kindness, this book is also special. It also has a whole bunch of different stories, but this time about the weather. And when I open it up, I see the title page. That's just to remind you of the title in case you forgot. And when I turn the page again, I see a special place called the Table of Contents. The Table of Contents tells you where to find things. Today, we're just going to do a quick picture walk and look at what kinds of stories we'll be reading for the next few weeks. While we're doing our picture walk, I want you to think about what you think these stories will be about. And that's what we'll be looking at for the next few weeks. That seems like a whole bunch of exciting things to read about the weather. Now, in this unit, we will talk about why it rains, what is weather, and how we stay safe in storms. Now, I have a special video of a kid that is also in kindergarten, just like you.
SRA open for reading. Background Builder. Unit 3. What's the weather?
These are the tales of Tyler. These are Tyler's tales.
On today's episode, Tyler is getting ready to leave his house for the bus stop.
Bye, Mom. I'm off to school.
The next morning, Tyler is once again getting ready to leave for the bus stop when he looks outside. Okay, everyone, it is raining today, and Tyler needs to go outside so he can get to the bus stop. What should Tyler do to prepare himself to go outside in the rain? Let's find out.
Bye, Mom. I'm off to school.
Way to go, Tyler. When it's raining, you need to wear protective clothing like a rain jacket, or use an umbrella to ensure that you don't get cold and wet.
These are the tales of Tyler. These are Tyler's tales.
It was interesting to see the different ways Tyler gets ready for school, depending on the weather. All right, friends, now I'm going to tell you a special kind of story. This type of story is one that you listen to and you use your brain to imagine what's happening instead of looking at pictures. So while I'm telling you the story, I want you to pretend there's a movie playing in your brain about the words I'm saying. You can even think about how you might get dressed for this kind of weather. Now, we know that rain is water that falls from the clouds in the sky, but there's a scientific word that we can use to talk about the water that falls from the sky. And that word is precipitation. Say it with me. Pre-sip-it-tation. Precipitation. There are many kinds of precipitation. What kind of precipitation falls in the winter? You might say snow if you live somewhere very cold, or freezing rain if you live out in Richmond. Sometimes there's even sleet. Now, all of these are types of frozen or hard and cold precipitation. Today, I will tell you about a special kind of frozen precipitation that may fall in the summer. Our story today is a type of nonfiction called explanatory text. Explanatory text is made up of some different parts. Explanatory text gives information about how or why something happens. It uses facts in the explanations. And it presents information in a clear sequence. Before we start, there are two important words to know from our story. The first word is humid. Humid describes air that contains water or is damp. When I visited my family in the Philippines, it was very humid. The air felt heavy and damp. The other word you need to know is moist. When something is moist, that means it is slightly wet or damp. The wipey is moist. We can clean our hands with a moist towelette. All right, we're almost ready to read. One last thing. While I'm telling you this story, I want you to think about our essential question. What types of weather have you seen? Our story today is called Hail, Ice from the Sky by Cynthia Light Brown. Have you ever seen ice fall from the sky? It's not rain, snow, or sleet. It's hail, and it sometimes falls during the summer when it is hot and humid. Remember, humid means the air has water or feels a bit wet. Ice falling from the sky? In the summer? That sounds crazy. It has to be cold to make ice, right? There are tiny pieces of ice high in the clouds, but hailstones are big balls of ice. How do those tiny pieces of ice turn into hailstones? Well, it takes a big thunderstorm. Thunderstorms often form when the sun warms the moist air on a hot summer day. Remember, moist means the air is slightly wet or damp. The hot air full of moisture rises high, up into the sky where it cools. And as the air cools, it forms tiny pieces of ice inside the clouds. When the ice gets too heavy, it falls, thaws, and melts into big, thick drops of rain. Plop, plop, plop. Some thunderstorms have strong winds whooshing up. The winds bounce the tiny pieces of ice up and down in the cloud like yo-yos. Every time a piece of ice bounces through the cloud, moisture from the cloud freezes on the outside, forming another layer of ice. The more times it bounces, the bigger it gets. When it becomes too heavy for the wind, it falls to earth as hail. The hailstones cool the air around them as they fall, allowing them to reach the ground. Now, let's summarize that a bit. What did this part of the selection tell? Well, this part talks about how the tiny pieces of ice bounce around, collect layers of ice getting bigger and bigger, and when they become too heavy, they fall as hail, and that hail cools the air around it so it's able to reach the ground. Ask a grown-up to cut open an onion. Look for the rings. That's what a hailstone looks like on the inside. Rings of ice. Hailstones can be small as baby peas or as big as golf balls. Sometimes they can even be bigger than oranges. So why does hail usually come in the summer? That's often when big thunderstorms come. Boom. Now, let's review the words humid and moist again. Which is more likely to be humid? A dry and sandy place or a wet and green place? A wet and green place is more likely to be humid, because humid means that the air has water or is damp. Do you think that hot and humid weather often leads to thunderstorms? Yes, hot and humid weather does lead to storms because humid air is warm and moist moist air often comes before storms. Is the ground moist before a thunderstorm or after? It's after a thunderstorm. Which would make your shoes moist? Walking through a puddle or playing inside? How do you know? Well, our shoes would be moist after walking through a puddle because they'd be a little wet. Now today, during our pods, we will be discussing this story. I want you to think about what you understand about how hail forms and what you imagined when I read our story. Do your best to hold all these ideas in your brain, and I'll see you later.